Look up, down, and around refers to the 7 environmental factors and their respective indicators, which are listed in the Incident Response Pocket Guide. All the indicators are important, but pay special attention to the indicators in bold print. Using the indicators is one of the keys to successfully applying the risk management process. There are 5 steps in the risk management process. 3 of these steps directly relate to the look up, down, and around indicators. With step 1, increase your situational awareness by looking for these indicators as you gather information and scout the fire. Based on your observations, start building a mental model of what the fire is doing. For step 2, hazard assessment, use the indicators to estimate the potential for fire behavior hazards. Continue building the mental model of the fire. Always be thinking, if this, then what? Then, for step 5, evaluate the situation by monitoring the indicators to determine what is changing. These changes can signal danger, and sometimes they can signal opportunity. There are 8 units in this course. The first 7 units address the environmental factors and their indicators. Each of these units starts with a firefighter sharing a story. Then a narrator presents the technical content. The unit ends with a review and instructor-led discussion. After the last unit, which addresses how to use the indicators when applying the risk management process, you will take the final exam. At the end of this course, you should be able to, given a scenario, identify look up, down, and around indicators using the Incident Response Pocket Guide, and identify the 3 steps in the risk management process that are directly related to the look up, down, and around indicators.
And one of the things we're going to talk about today are the fuel characteristics, certain things to look out for when you're in the field. A lot of my experience have been down in Nevada, and one of the things to be particularly heads up on is fine flashy fuels, kind of continuous fuels. So sage and cheatgrass, those are 2 big things to look out for. You get down into some of those rolling sage fires and grass fires, you definitely need 1 foot in the black. That stuff's going to carry, it's going to move fast. We've seen it spot half a mile out, and that's one of those things where if you're not very careful, it can get up on top of you quickly. So that's definitely one of those things we look at when we rolled into a fire via the helicopter. Another thing we did, and part of look up, look down, look around, is checking out the fuel types when you're actually driving in the chase truck, kind of checking out the terrain, checking out everything around you, and that's kind of something everybody on the crew does. It's not just the driver driving, but it's everybody in the ship. It's everybody in the truck. It's everybody kind of looking out and talking about what they're seeing. That's a big point. Another one of the things to look out for, and something we saw in Utah and something I saw for the first time, was a serious amount of bug kill in a forest. And I'd never seen, it was probably 50 to 75%. And it was amazing the amount of standing snags and the amount of fuel that was dead and down, just basically jackpots or crisscrosses. I mean, stuff that's going to carry, stuff that's going to impede your progress, a lot of stuff you're going to have to cut through. These are certain things that you can look out for when you're flying in or when you're driving in. You can see that from the air very easily, either in a jump ship or in a helicopter or in the chase truck driving into a fire. Things you can look out for while you're riding in the engine, pretty much anywhere when you're traveling into the fire. Just look, see, talk about what you see, and it's a good learning process right there.
This unit addresses the 5 indicators for fuel characteristics. These indicators determine the potential for fire intensity and rate of spread. Over time, fuel characteristics change very slowly. However, they can change quickly over a distance as the fire moves into new fuels. Look for these 5 indicators in burning fuels and in fuels adjacent to the fire. Continuous fine fuels. Heavy loading of dead and down. Ladder fuels. Tight crown spacing less than 20 feet. Special conditions. The first indicator is continuous fine fuels. This indicator is one of the 4 major common denominators of fire behavior on tragedy fires. Continuous fine fuels are fast-drying, dead or live fuels that are less than 1/4 inch in diameter and have a time lag of 1 hour or less. When continuous fine fuels are dry, they ignite readily and are consumed rapidly by fire. They increase the potential for rapid rate of spread, and they are the primary carrier of fire. The next indicator, heavy loading of dead and down fuels, is on the other side of the fuel scale. This indicator is defined as a large load of dead material, 3-inch or larger wood, that is on the forest floor. Heavy loading of dead and down fuel increases the potential for intense burning conditions. This type of fuel is consumed more slowly and for a longer duration than continuous fine fuels. Look for this indicator in older, mature stands of trees, bug-killed trees, hurricane blowdown, and thinned or logged areas. Another indicator, ladder fuels, provides the potential for surface fire to move into the crowns. They help initiate and assure the continuation of crown fires. If there is high-intensity surface fire, the fire can move into the crowns with limited ladder fuels. Examples of ladder fuels include conifer reproduction and brush, tree branches that hang close to the ground, and lichens and moss that grow in conifer trees. The next indicator, tight crown spacing, occurs when crowns are less than 20 feet apart. Once a fire gets into tightly spaced crowns, anticipate that the fire will move from crown to crown. Tight crown spacing is required to sustain a moving crown fire. If there are high winds or steep slopes, a crown fire can move through more widely spaced vegetation. This indicator is equally important in timber and brush fuel types. The last indicator for fuel characteristics is special conditions. There are several special conditions that you need to pay attention to. The first one is firebrand sources, which include any sources of heat capable of igniting wildland fuels. Always assess the firebrand sources because fuel type characteristics and availability may change due to local or unique conditions. Identifying firebrand sources will also help anticipate severity of spotting problems. Snags are another special condition. Snags are drier and usually ready for ignition. Preheated canopy is a special condition to watch out for. If the fire has burned through the surface fuels and left the canopy preheated and scorched, this will cause the vegetation to dry out and become more flammable. Frost and bug kill, another special condition, can cause an enormous amount of fuel to be available. The last special condition to look for is unusually fine fuels, such as draped pine needles in manzanita brush stands in Northern California, tree lichens in the Northwest and the Rockies. These are just a few examples of special conditions that you need to monitor. When scouting the fire, look for these fuel characteristic indicators. Think about how they may interact with other indicators, such as slope and wind. Add those observations to your mental model of the fire and estimate potential fire behavior hazards. We have just covered the 5 indicators for fuel characteristics: continuous fine fuels, heavy loading of dead and down, ladder fuels, tight crown spacing, less than 20 feet, special conditions.
Today we're going to talk about fuel moisture and how important it is in terms of determining what your fire activity is going to be like. A lot of you may know, and if you don't, you soon will, that we are not just local resources but national resources, and that wherever you go, it's your responsibility and your crew's responsibility to know what the fuel moistures are going to be like where you're at. And a good way to determine that is with your indice cards, being your energy release component and your burn index. And these are going to tell you where you're going, the local conditions on if they're in a drought or not, what their 1 and 10 hour fuels are going to look like, and how it's going to burn. Fuel moisture is always important to keep heads up on and to be aware of what it is on different slopes, different aspects. I can easily recall one time in 2003 on a fire in Taos, New Mexico, where like clockwork at 1400 every day, temperatures would reach 78 and RHs would be critical at 22%. And fire activity would greatly increase. And throughout that 2-week period that we were there, we always made sure that we had escape routes and adequate safety zones around us at all times so that we could get back and retreat at those times. And one of the most important people out there was a lookout during that fire and letting us know as fire is picking up and where we're at in relation to the fire to get back to our escape routes.
This unit addresses fuel moisture and its 4 indicators. When fuel moisture content is low, fires will start easily and spread rapidly. The amount of moisture in fuel changes diurnally, seasonally, and in an accumulative manner over several seasons or years. To understand the relationship between fuel moisture and fire behavior, you need to be familiar with time lag. Time lag refers to the rate at which a specific size of dead fuel gains or loses moisture. The smaller the fuel size, the shorter the time lag. There are 4 time lag categories. 1 hour fuels are less than 1/4 inch in diameter. The moisture in 1 hour fuels fluctuates considerably, especially with changes in relative humidity. 10 hour fuels are 1/4 inch to 1 inch in diameter. 100 hour fuels are 1 to 3 inches in diameter. And 1,000 hour fuels are 3 to 8 inches in diameter. The fuel moisture content in these larger fuels change at a much slower rate compared to the finer fuels. The 1,000 hour fuels begin to burn at 20% fuel moisture content. They are considered very dry at 13%. Now it is time to look closer at the 4 indicators of fuel moisture. Low relative humidity, less than 25%. Low 10-hour fuel moisture content, less than 6%. Drought conditions, and seasonal drying. Low relative humidity, less than 25%, is a critical indicator. Historically, the majority of large fires have occurred when the temperature was above average and relative humidity was unusually low. Small changes in relative humidity can have a significant impact on fine fuels because they can lose moisture quickly and become flammable. There are several ways to monitor relative humidity. Use a belt weather kit or other similar weather equipment. Obtain weather information from remote automated weather stations and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Weather Service websites. Refer to the pocket card for local thresholds for relative humidity. And use the table Severe fire behavior potential related to relative humidity and fuel moisture content in the Incident Response Pocket Guide to anticipate fire behavior. The next indicator is low 10-hour fuel moisture content, less than 6%. When sticks and small stems, the 10-hour fuels, have less than 6% fuel moisture content, anticipate fire behavior problems. However, in Alaska and eastern United States, 10%, not 6%, fuel moisture content is considered low. 10-hour fuels play an important role in carrying the fire, so pay attention to their fuel moisture content. Before going to the fire, find out what the fuel moisture levels are by talking to local dispatch or visiting websites such as the National Interagency Coordination Center website. When on the fire line, estimate 10-hour fuel moisture levels by grabbing small twigs and branches and see if they are easy to break or if they just bend. Drought conditions is the next indicator. Drought will cause large dead and down fuels and live fuels to become available to burn. Live fuels are frequently consumed by fire when there is enough dead and dry fuels to support the fire. The effect of drought is accumulative over several seasons or years. There are several indices that provide drought information. Typically, these indices provide information on a broader scale, and the local conditions may vary. You can find these indices on the internet. The first one is the Palmer Drought Severity Index. This index is most effective in determining long-term drought, a matter of several months, and is not as good with short-term forecasts. The next one is the Keach-Byram Drought Index. This index is a good predictor of fire severity in the humid environment of the southeastern United States. The last index is the U.S. Drought Monitor, which provides broad-scale drought information. To access local drought conditions, refer to the pocket card for the area. It may have the threshold for 1,000-hour fuel moisture. Ask local fire personnel about drought conditions. Look at the vegetation and trees. How dry are the larger dead fuels? Observe areas where there have been recent fires. Did the large dead logs partially burn or burn down to ash pits? The last fuel moisture indicator is seasonal drying. Seasonal drying varies in all geographical areas and occurs at different times of the year. Seasonal drying affects the fuel moisture in all fuels. As seasonal drying progresses, fuels that could not support fire previously will become available to burn. As you look at fuel conditions, determine how far along the seasonal drying has progressed. Fine fuels, such as needles and leaves on the ground or grass, usually dry first, followed by dead and down sticks and logs, and then live fuels start drying. When scouting the fire, look for these indicators as part of the risk management process. Add those observations to your mental model of the fire and estimate potential fire behavior hazards. We have just covered the 4 indicators for fuel moisture: low relative humidity, less than 25%, low 10-hour fuel moisture content, less than 6%, drought conditions, and seasonal drying.
A couple things I always look at when I'm trying to size up the potential for a fire are the time of day and also the aspect the fire's on. And the reason being, that'll cause a huge change in the temperature of those fuels during the spread or growth of that fire. And specifically, boy, if you're early in the morning in a Vegas flat and the fire is just laying there, but you know the sun is going to be bright in the afternoon, the fuels are going to increase in temperature greatly. And guess what? With that, you're going to see a big increase in fire behavior and activity. And then the other one I always try to take a very good look at is aspect, because if you have any kind of south-facing slope and you're early in the morning, boy, by afternoon, towards later on in the burn period, you're going to have significant heating of those fuels, and with that a large increase in fire activity. The other one on fuel temperature that you'd need to consider is, boy, when you're mopping up a fire, we always say, well, let the sun shine on a bit, and some of those smokes will show. And you can definitely see it. You get to a fire early in the morning and you're mopping it up, cleaning it up, hardly any smokes, but boy, by the afternoon, the sun's been shining on it, you got smokes popping up everywhere. So when you're mopping up a fire, take your time, make sure you let the sun shine on it quite a bit before you call it out.
This unit addresses fuel temperature and its 3 indicators. Fuel temperature affects the amount of heat energy and time it takes for fuels to ignite. It also contributes to fuel availability. It is particularly important in fuel types that are dominated by fine fuels. The 3 indicators of fuel temperature that you need to pay attention to include high temperatures, normally greater than 85 degrees, a high percentage of fuels with direct exposure to the sun, aspects where fuel temperature is increasing. It is critical to monitor the first indicator, high temperatures that are greater than 85 degrees Fahrenheit. High temperatures will increase the flammability of fine fuels and the potential rate of spread. However, temperatures lower than 85 degrees, combined with low relative humidity, can also increase fire behavior. To monitor temperature, take weather readings on a regular basis using a belt weather kit or other equipment. The next indicator is high percentage of fuels with direct sun exposure. These fuels will have accelerated drying rates because of the higher fuel temperature and lower fuel moisture. This can increase fuel flammability, especially fine fuel flammability, and increase fire spread. Be observant. When on the fire line, look for fuels, especially fine fuels, that are in direct sunlight and anticipate what may happen if fire moves into these fuels. You should also look at the aspect of the slope when considering fuel temperature. As a day progresses, slopes may be shaded or in direct sunlight depending on their aspect. The fuels on slopes in direct sunlight will have higher fuel temperature, which increases the risk of hazardous fire behavior. When you are on the fire line, pay attention to aspect and anticipate fuel temperature based on sunlight exposure. When scouting the fire, look for fuel temperature indicators. Think about how these indicators may change as the day progresses. Continue building your mental model of the fire. We have just covered 3 indicators of fuel temperatures. High temperatures, normally greater than 85 degrees, a high percentage of fuels with direct exposure to the sun, aspects where fuel temperature is increasing.
One of the critical factors affecting fire behavior is terrain. And being able as a firefighter to read terrain and know what you're looking at, know how that's going to affect fire behavior is critical to not only being safe and keeping your crew safe, but knowing where to be and where not to be on a fire. Steep slopes, deep canyons, narrow canyons, all those things have huge influences on fire behavior. And especially when you combine those things with other factors like wind, weather, such as temperatures and humidities. All those things come together can really increase with terrain effects that the fire has. Something a lot of firefighters look at a fire as just smoldering or part of a fire they're working on, don't think it's a big deal. It's right at the base of a slope, or maybe it's mid-slope, think it's a piece of cake. But they don't realize that all day long that fire is just kind of percolating and heating that slope right above it. As that warm air rises, it's heating that slope above it. And then you get some other things like temperatures rising, humidity's lowering, maybe some wind on it, and all of a sudden you hit that flash point and it's just off to the races. That fire can really rip way faster than you can outrun it. And if you haven't planned on that and been expecting that to happen, you can get yourself in a really tight situation in a hurry. Another aspect of terrain is the aspect of how the hill is orientated, whether it's south facing, north facing, or what have you. The sun definitely is going to bake down on those south slopes. Your southeast, your south, your southwest, even your west slopes, they have that sun hitting them all day long, heating them up. A lot of times the fuels are going to cure a lot faster. The fuel moistures will be a lot lower. And you just got to expect that when the fire comes off a north side onto a south side, you're going to have a totally different fire. So that's something to be watching for. It catches people by surprise often. Sometimes you have the same fuel type on the south side as you have on other aspects. Sometimes it's completely different fuel type. We'll get up in these narrow canyons. Winds are really increased as the winds, your normal daytime heating comes up those canyons. That wind gets compressed, and we call it the Venturi effect. And you get up and goes over these saddles. The wind's got to go out somewhere, and that can really catch you by surprise. Anytime you're in steep terrain, saddles, narrow canyons, you got to be thinking about the effects of the fire and how that's going to influence it. Keep yourself safe.
This unit addresses terrain and its 5 indicators. Terrain has been a major factor in numerous fatality fires. It is one of the 4 major common denominators of fire behavior on tragedy fires. Look for these 5 indicators as you scout the terrain. Steep slopes, greater than 50%. Chutes, box canyons. Saddles, narrow canyons. Steep slopes, greater than 50%, are an important indicator of potential hazardous conditions. Anticipate rapid rates of spread because of flame contact and heat transfer to new fuels. Steep slopes can also cause downhill spotting problems due to rollouts of burning material and igniting fuel below. Chutes and box canyons are also critical indicators. Watch for rapid upslope rates of spread because of the steep terrain and updrafts of air. This is often referred to as the chimney effect. Another common terrain feature to look for is saddles. Fires are pushed through saddles faster due to wind channeling and less topographic resistance compared to a full ridge line. Narrow canyons, the last indicator, can cause rapid rates of spread due to spotting, slope reversal, and wind eddies. Radiant and convective spotting in narrow canyons can produce multiple spot fires over short distances. A slope reversal in a narrow canyon can occur when a fire that is backing downhill reaches the opposite slope and has a rapid upslope run. Wind eddies in intersecting drainages or forks in narrow canyons can cause very erratic fire behavior. When scouting the fire, look for these indicators. Remember that alignment of topography and wind should always be considered a trigger point to reevaluate strategy and tactics. Continue to build your mental model of the fire. We just covered the 5 indicators for terrain. Steep slopes, greater than 50%, chutes, box canyons, saddles, and narrow canyons.
You know, in discussing fire behavior, I always try to break it down into, slope and wind are the two major factors that are going to determine how quickly a fire moves and which direction a fire moves. And in general speaking, the wind plays a larger role in the direction of fire spread, the rate of fire spread. And so I always put wind up there as one of the biggest indicators that I pay attention to. A wind-driven fire is predictable for the most part. When you have consistent winds, you pretty much know which direction the fire is going to spread. You know pretty much which way your spot fires are going to be because the wind has been blowing that direction, and it's a fairly predictable event. The big indicator is when either the wind A doesn't do what you expected it to do or what it was forecasted, or the one that always makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck is when the wind stops and you get that eerie calm. You can associate it with a lot of different events, but typically those events are large scale, such as in a thunderstorm. There's always that calm. You get the high winds at the intake, there'll be the calm, and then the big outflow winds when the anvil basically collapses and matures. The same thing can happen with a column. You have your fire, it's breathing all this air, it's consuming all this fuel, it's pulling all this wind in. Suddenly it gets calm. And then you think, wait a minute, I didn't expect that to happen. What's going to happen next? That's an indicator that my fire environment might change. And I started thinking about, the column collapse, those big outflow winds. And, if I have the opportunity, I'm on the radio or I'm on the phone trying to talk to National Weather Service, or, talking to somebody from the weather who has a better, maybe a broader picture than I do, to, hey, why is this happening? Is this something that's you expected to happen and there's not going to be, we're just going to have calm winds the rest of the day? Or is this something that's going to happen that's going to directly affect my fire environment, that's going to change it? The eerie calm, it's the old adage weighs in, the calm before the storm. It's one of those moments you definitely want to stop, reevaluate your situation, your crew's situation, where your personnel are, and think about, okay, if my environment changes and the wind switches direction or the wind velocity increases dramatically, am I still in a safe spot? Is my crew still in a safe spot? Or are other people still in a safe spot? Anytime the wind, when you get that unexpected, unexpected wind direction, unexpected shift, or unexpected calm, it's a cause to constantly reevaluate your situation and get more information. It might not lead to anything, but it might lead to something very, very important, and what can have a very, very big effect on fire behavior.
This unit addresses wind and its 7 indicators. Wind is a critical factor influencing fire behavior, and it is also the most difficult to predict. Wind is associated with one of the 4 major common denominators of fire behavior on tragedy fires. There are 7 indicators for wind. Surface winds above 10 miles per hour. Lenticular clouds. High, fast-moving clouds. Approaching cold fronts. Cumulonimbus development. Sudden calm. Battling or shifting winds. The first and most obvious wind indicator is the presence of surface winds above 10 miles per hour. One example of a strong surface wind is the Föhn wind. There had been several firefighter fatalities due to Föhn wind conditions. Föhn winds are the result of high-pressure systems and mountainous terrain. These winds are accompanied by lower relative humidity and higher temperatures. A firn wind can last for a few hours or for several days, and the winds can be 40 to 60 miles per hour with higher gusts. A local wind regaining influence over a decreasing firn wind is also extremely dangerous. This occurred on several fatality fires such as the Innaha fire and the Hauser fire. Firn winds are most commonly found in the western United States due to the mountainous terrain. They are known by various local names such as Santa Ana, Chinook, Wasatch, East, and North. Moderate to strong surface winds can influence fire behavior by increasing rate and direction of spread, transporting firebrands over large areas, causing wind-driven fire runs and convective heat transfer between fuels. It is imperative to continually monitor wind conditions. Pay attention to weather forecasts. Throw dust in the air or tie a piece of flagging to your vehicle to tell wind direction. Take wind readings with a handheld anemometer or other measuring devices. Reference the Buford scale for estimating wind speed in the IRPG. Monitor remote automated weather stations. The next indicator is lenticular clouds. They form over the crest of mountains and indicate moderate to strong, high-level winds aloft. These winds may surface in the afternoon, which could cause fire behavior hazards. High, fast-moving clouds are another indicator. If clouds are moving in a different direction from the surface winds, anticipate wind shifts. An approaching cold front is also an indicator. Expect dangerous conditions due to stronger winds and changing wind direction. Cold fronts have been responsible for many erratic and extreme fire behavior events due to strong, sudden wind shifts. Look for a squall line of thunderstorms or wall of dust as a visual indicator. A dry cold front does not have a squall line, but may typically cause a shift in wind direction, increase wind speed, and a minor decrease in temperature. If you see cumulonimbus development, pay close attention. It is an indicator of an approaching thunderstorm. Notice the cauliflower shape and flat bottom of a cumulonimbus cloud. A thunderstorm can progress from a simple cumulus cloud to a mature thunderstorm in as little as 30 minutes. If you see cumulonimbus clouds, expect strong winds, erratic downdraft winds, and lightning, which can cause sudden and extreme fire behavior. If there is virga, rain that does not reach the ground, then downdrafts have begun and anticipate strong and gusty winds. Another indicator is sudden calm. If you observe sudden calm, expect wind shifts or other changes in weather which could increase the potential for hazardous fire conditions. Battling or shifting winds are critical weather situations confronting firefighters. These winds can be caused by several conditions, such as a cold front passage, wind blowing through saddles, wind at the confluence of a drainage, and local wind effects. Pay attention to weather forecasts because they can often predict battling or shifting winds. Wind is a critical indicator. Always pay close attention to weather forecasts and observe what the winds are doing at all times. We have just covered 7 indicators for wind. Surface winds above 10 miles per hour, lenticular clouds, high fast-moving clouds, approaching cold front, cumulonimbus development, sudden calm, battling and shifting winds.
Okay, the setup is Type 2 team assigned. My role with the team is a division supervisor. I had 2 resources assigned. They were both Type 2 hand crews. And our assignment was to go direct on a piece of fire that was burning in your typical Great Basin fuels, sagebrush, grass mix, with grass being the primary fire carrier. Fuel conditions were very dry. The weather forecast that morning for us was very favorable to do what we were supposed to do. And we went ahead, briefed the crews, and proceeded to the line and carried out our direct line assignment. One of the things we noticed as we were deploying that morning was the development of Castellanus clouds, which is the beginning stages of cumulus. And we recognized those, talked about them a little bit, but I would say we didn't concern ourselves with them that much, because the forecast was for westerly winds, and we all agreed that they would push out as the day progressed. Turns out the clouds, I think because of some terrain influences and such, and the lack of wind development that day, didn't push out as much as we thought they would, and they continued to build, and we received some steady and increasing downdrafts as a result. By mid-afternoon, we were getting significant downdrafts with gusts of 30 miles an hour from these from the cumulus development. This changed our tactics drastically. We went into a defensive mode. The crews went into the black, and at that point we ordered additional resources and proceeded with structure protection in the area. Looking back on the day, I think that we probably discounted the effect that we were going to get from the cumulus cloud development that day. We underestimated the potential for downdrafts, which really put us in a bind, and if we didn't react promptly to that, would have been a major safety factor.
This unit addresses atmospheric stability and its 7 indicators. Atmospheric stability is the resistance of the atmosphere to vertical motion. If the atmosphere is stable, vertical movement of air is limited, and this decreases fire activity. If the atmosphere is unstable, vertical movement of air is occurring, and this tends to increase potential for the fire to develop vertically and grow rapidly. It is important to not only recognize when an air mass is unstable, but also when it is in transition from stable to unstable. This video shows how an unstable atmosphere can increase fire activity. Use the Haynes Index, which measures the stability and dryness of the lower atmosphere, to predict the potential for existing fire to become large fires. This index ranges between 2 and 6. The higher the number, the drier and more unstable the atmosphere. When you are on an assignment, listen to the weather briefings and look in the IAP for the Haynes Index. To monitor atmospheric stability, constantly be looking for any of the 7 indicators. Good visibility, gusty winds and dust devils, cumulus clouds, castellatus clouds in the morning, smoke rises straight up, inversion beginning to lift, thermal belt. The first indicator is good visibility, which is a sign of unstable atmospheric conditions. The next indicator is gusty winds and dust devils. These conditions can make fires more dangerous by increasing spotting and starting new fires. Cumulus clouds are an indicator of vertical movement. The more they develop vertically, the more unstable the atmosphere. Seeing castellatus clouds in the morning indicate an unstable atmosphere and could be a warning of thunderstorms in the afternoon. These clouds consist of cumuliform clouds, which are usually arranged in lines. Smoke rising straight up is an indicator of vertical movement and an unstable atmosphere. Another sign that the atmosphere is becoming unstable is when you see an inversion beginning to lift. For example, when an inversion is breaking, relative humidity values can drop from the 40s and 50s back into the single digits in less than 1 hour. The behavior of the fire burning beneath an inversion can change abruptly when the inversion is lifting. The final indicator is a thermal belt. This occurs when the air is stable. During the night, cooler air from higher mountain elevations drains into the lower elevations, causing more stable conditions. This initiates a thermal belt, which is a zone of warm nighttime temperatures and lower nighttime relative humidity on top of a night inversion. Its presence is most evident during clear weather with light wind. Fire conditions in a thermal belt can remain quite active during the night. When you are on a fire, observe the clouds, smoke, and other stability to estimate potential fire behavior hazards. Continue building your mental model of the fire. We have just covered the 7 indicators for atmospheric stability: good visibility, gusty winds and dust devils, cumulus clouds, castellatus clouds in the morning, smoke rises straight up, inversion beginning to lift, thermal belt.
Yeah, I'd like to talk briefly about a prescribed burn we did at Kings Canyon National Park, where towards the end of the day we experienced some downdrafts from some thunderstorms. And what this did, this triggered some additional spot fire patrols. And towards the end of the day in the evening, we detected a spot fire about a quarter acre, about 500 feet off the fire line. The terrain was steep. The fuels were very heavy in the timber fuel model, and then also the fuels were very crunchy underneath your boots, so that indicated quite a bit of dryness. We did line the spot that evening and came out the next day to the next shift to mop up the spot fire. Prior to engaging any mop up, we made the assumption that if there's one spot fire, there might be more out there. So before putting people on the spot, we put a lookout up on a nice outcrop that could see the spot fire in the entire area around there. And then we also constructed an escape route through the heavy fuels that would go from the spot fire uphill into the cool black from the previous burning from the day before. The key indicators on this were heavy fuels, dryness of fuels, steep terrain, and then downdrafts from possible spot thunder cells. And then also we monitored throughout the day the fire behavior, relative humidity, and then the general state of the weather.
This unit addresses the 8 indicators for fire behavior. Fire is a heat source. Therefore, it influences and modifies the fire environment. Constantly monitor fire behavior by observing column characteristics, flame length, and rate of spread. When on the fire line, look for these 8 indicators: leaning column, sheared column, well-developed column, changing column, trees torching, smoldering fires picking up, small fire whirls beginning, frequent spot fires. A leaning column is one of the first fire behavior indicators that you will see when approaching a fire. A leaning column is typical of wind-driven fires, therefore anticipate rapid rates of spread and short-range spotting. A sheared column rises straight up and then at some level is sharply sheared off in a horizontal direction by winds aloft. This can cause long-range spotting, and winds aloft can surface and increase fire behavior. Avoid working under a sheared column. A critical indicator to look for is a well-developed column. Anticipate intense burning conditions and unpredictable fire spread in any direction. If the well-developed column has a capping cumulus top, then expect strong downbursts. Feeling a light rain or sudden calm under this type of column is an immediate indicator of a possible downburst. A plume-dominated fire, which has a well-developed column that sometimes reaches more than 20,000 feet, occurs when the power of the fire becomes stronger than the power of the local winds. Look for any changes in the smoke column. For example, when the color of the column changes from light to dark, or when the column starts to rotate faster, it means fire intensity is building. Another critical indicator is trees torching. If you see intermittent single tree torching progressing to groups of trees torching, expect hazardous fire behavior conditions. Look for smoldering fires that are picking up. These fires are becoming active. Monitor the flame length and spread rate. The presence of small fire whorls beginning is an indicator that the fire is developing vertically, building intensity, and may have potential to transport firebrands. Fire whorls develop when there is wind shear in the lower atmosphere and unstable heated air near the surface. Frequent spot fires are a critical indicator, especially when there are more spot fires than the crews can handle. Anticipate fire behavior hazards when spot fires are increasing. Look for these fire behavior indicators when you are on a fire. Think about how other indicators, such as wind and fuel type, may change the fire behavior. Add these observations to your mental model of the fire. We have just covered the 8 fire behavior indicators: leaning column, sheared column, well-developed column, changing column, trees torching, smoldering fires picking up, small fire whorls beginning, frequent spot fires. We just discussed 7 environmental factors and their respective indicators. Let's see how well you do with identifying indicators by having an exercise. Refer to your student workbook as we watch this scenario of different fire scenes, and mark the indicators you observed on the form in your student workbook. We just covered the look up, down, and around indicators. We described each of the indicators, how they impact fire behavior, and how to monitor them. This unit addresses how to use the indicators when applying the risk management process. There are 5 steps in the risk management process. 3 of these steps are directly relevant to the look up, down, and around indicators. During Step 1, Situation Awareness, gather information about the indicators before going on the fire line. For example, check websites for weather and fuel information, and talk with local fire personnel. Then, when you are on the fire line, increase your situation awareness by looking for indicators. Use the belt weather kit to assess humidity, wind, and other indicators. Assess fuel conditions. For example, is the fire burning in continuous fine fuels? What is the fuel moisture level? Are there ladder fuels or tight crown spacing? Scout the terrain for steep slopes, chutes, or other terrain features. Observe the wind and atmospheric stability. Watch fire behavior. If you observe one indicator at a critical level, immediately look for other indicators because they can influence each other and have an accumulative effect. Start creating a mental model of the fire based on the indicators. For Step 2, Hazard Assessment, use the indicators to estimate potential fire behavior hazards. The presence of one indicator does not always mean there will be hazardous fire conditions, but it should give you a heads up to look for other indicators. Typically, several indicators are present when hazardous fire behavior occurs. For example, you see fine fuels. The relative humidity is low and temperatures are high. This tells you that there is a high possibility that fuels could readily ignite and spread rapidly. Or you see steep slopes and the surface wind is above 10 miles per hour and in alignment with the slope. Anticipate that the fire is moving towards these slopes and there may be rapid upslope runs, firebrands, and spotting. For Step 5, evaluate the situation to determine what is changing. Monitor trends to assess how an indicator is changing. For example, is relative humidity falling or rising rapidly? Is the wind shifting or increasing or decreasing? Is the smoke changing color or volume? Is the fire moving from one fuel type to another fuel type? Sometimes these trends can signal danger, whereas other times they can signal opportunity. Use the information you've gathered and continue to build a mental model of the fire. Always be thinking, if this, then what? We have just completed Look Up, Down, and Around and covered these 2 course objectives. Given a scenario, identify Look Up, Down, and Around indicators using the Incident Response Pocket Guide. And identify the 3 steps in the risk management process that are directly related to the Look Up, Down, and Around indicators. Now it is time